Tired of the grind? Feeling trapped in a job that drains you? Watching your life just slip away in endless meetings and emails? What if you could escape the burnout, reclaim your freedom, and build something real, something that belongs to you? I made the leap from Fortune 500 boardrooms to full-time farming, and today, I'll show you exactly how you too can do it. Because this life is medicine for your mind, your body, and your soul. The blueprint to your life starts now.
Jim, why did you make the leap from Wall Street to farming?
Well, Grant, I'll tell you, it was a very difficult time that I experienced. One of the, President Nixon said, until you've been in the deepest valley, do you know how magnificent it is to be on the highest mountain? And 2019 is when I learned that my wife, Kathy, had breast cancer. And we worked like crazy to try to save her life. Unfortunately, she lost her life to cancer on April 3rd, 2020. And we had purchased our family farm in 2001, but really hadn't paid a lot of attention to it. Came down twice a year to look at it, but it, just like anything, it got out of control. The trees were growing everywhere. The house that I grew up in caved in. It was feeling like how I was feeling. And so when she passed away, I said, you know what? I've been doing the rat race. All I'm doing is paying a lot of high taxes, making money, dealing with reorganizations every year, burnt out. Every other boss you like, but the one that doesn't like you is trying to fire you. I've been fired about 3 times. And I just said, you know what? Why am I dealing with this? This is crazy. We saved enough. My wife didn't listen to me, so she invested our money properly. Had a little bit of a nest egg, and I sold my house, a beautiful home that we had in Scarsdale that I loved. And it was a great community. We were elites in New York. We had parties at our home. So it was a lot to give up, to decide. A lot of friends were like, you can't leave. You can't leave. I said, I'm getting out of here. My property taxes was $43,000 a year. And I said, with all that expense, I really could be doing more. And so I decided to go home to Lexington, to return home, to restore my heart and to restore my family farm. And when I did that, it saved my life. But a big part of it is not the money that we'd saved or invested. The big part was the decision to do it, like Eric and Gail. How do you conclude that, okay, I've had enough? Let's cut the crap here and decide to live a better life and be free. George Strait, I listened to him all throughout when my wife was dying. And one of the favorite songs that helped me to get through this, he said, I ain't rich, but I'm free. What I got on is mine, and I ain't got a dime. And I felt the same way. And I said, you know what? I can do this. So sold my house, moved home like the Beverly Hillbillies. Instead of moving to Beverly Hillbillies, I moved to Lexington. When I got back home, I don't know what part was on, but, a miracle truly happened because I decided to make it happen. We're blessed. You don't keep praying, Lord, please bless me through I've already sent you a blessing. You need to execute. I got to help others. And I did. And when Gail called me, and said, look, we've been doing it for 25 years. We'd like to show you how it works. They became my best friends, cheerleaders, copers to help me to deal with the transition of loss. I love them. And they introduced me to my only begotten son, Grant, their son, and they shared Grant with me, you. And it's changed my life. And anybody that's listening, whether if you're going through tough times or not, you don't have to keep working for the man. You don't have to, all this change and getting laid off. You don't need 100 acres. 3 to 5 acres, you can start making a living on your own and do it. If you even have to use, you don't have to use what Eric gave me and all this equipment. You can use hand tools, Grant. You know that. And you can make some good money and be free and get healthy mentally and physically and financially if you do it the right way, and listen and be willing that when the Lord puts people like you all in your life, that you're willing to take their advice. A young kid telling an old man what to do, I had to grovel to you that you knew more than me. And I needed you. And I was able to help you. And we have bonded as a result of that.
Absolutely, Jim. And, my father, he had a mentor coming into farming when he started. He went from being a career chemist in his 20s. He had a really serious illness because of some of the chemicals that he was working with. And he spent 2 years in the hospital. Not many of his coworkers visited him. His boss didn't visit him. And he saw kind of the two-faced side of corporate America is that, hey, we care about you as long as you're working for us, but as soon as you stop being productive, we just want to get rid of you.
Take you out.
And so, he held that through the rest of his career for the next 20 years. And, he moved and went to Ohio, where I was born. And then when I was about 4 years old, he said, hey, I'm done with this. You're making more than me, he said to his wife. And, he said, hey,
partners. They were partners, smart partners working together.
Let's raise the boys on the farm. And so, they took a map of the U.S. and kind of said, hey, here's where we want to live. And they found this location. It had good schools. It had the Lexington schools.
Had UK.
Yep. And, they said, hey, this is the spot. It's got a nice farmhouse. It's got 10 acres. That should be enough to start a little farm. And so he made the leap. He stopped being in the rat race in corporate America.
Saved his life, didn't it, Grant? It saved his life.
He went from being 225 and pre-diabetic to losing, 40 or 50 pounds in the first couple of years.
Now today he rides a bike 75 miles.
He's 70 years old and he rides, 70 miles a day. He just did a Colombia trip. They're in New Zealand right now. They're in the best shape of their life.
Their parents are super wealthy.
Yep.
Because they have their health and each
health.
other.
Yes.
They have each other and their health. They are billionaires.
Yes.
And they're free.
Absolutely. And but it's really a great step to, step away from your corporate job and get into farming. And, one of my father's first mentors in farming, he was a conventional farmer. It was this guy, Robert Stone. He raised strawberries and other fruits and vegetables in Paris, Kentucky, just probably 20 minutes north of us. And he taught my father a lot, and he showed him, how do you make beds, what time of year do you start planting stuff. And this is what I brought to you in that first meeting in February of 2021, as I said, hey, we've got to get a calendar.
Yeah.
We got to plan this out and figure out when we're putting what in the ground, when we're going to harvest it, be able to tell our customers how many pounds of what are we going to sell what week, and how many times a week are we going to deliver, and give them everything up front that they need to know.
Now, Grant, you remember when we had that first planning meeting with your parents on, it was Zoom, and you were talking, and I just pulled up I said, I'm going to get him. I had a paper calendar that was a regular calendar. And you were talking, I just put it on the Zoom. I said, Grant, y'all got to write this down. I don't even know what we got to write this down on this. We got to come up. We can't keep having meetings and not writing stuff down. And Grant said, you remember you said, I am. And you pulled that Excel sheet up with share. Brother, I was blown away.
Yeah, I pulled up Excel on Zoom and I started typing in the dates when we would start planting stuff. And it was all based off of the Farmer's Almanac, when the last frost date is. You don't want to put out plants when they could get frostbitten and, basically killed off by the frost. And so in Lexington, the frost-free date is May 10th.
Yeah.
And, there's some crops that you can put out
earlier. What does that mean, frost-free date? What does that mean, Grant?
Yeah, that's kind of when there's basically zero risk of whatever you're putting out in the field, dying off because of frost. You might still get a 35-degree night, but you're not going to get below 32. Really, a killing frost is like a few degrees below, like 28, 27.
One thing that you reminded me of, for anybody out there on our show that's listening in, it's not always the capital that you need. It's also the intellectual capital. And I didn't have that for organic farming. I knew about farming and my father told me what to do, but I didn't know about the planning, how to do a seed order, how to project out volume. And what I needed was intellectual capital. And you get that by listening. And that's what you gave me. But if you're hard-headed and you're stubborn, you're going to miss out on these gifts that the good Lord will give you. And what you gave me, was priceless because I didn't know anything about that. And for anybody to listen, if you want to get into farming, you need to listen to a Grant. You need to listen to someone that knows what they're talking about and not try to do it yourself. You'll save a lot of money and a lot of time, because I would have been out there planting seeds in July. Pardon, ain't nothing going to come up out of that ground in October and November. It would have been too cold, but it was a game changer to have you. And right from the start.
I tried to save you. The first kind of few years of farming that I mentioned in the last episode was pretty rocky for us. So
we made it.
Yep.
And we are working well together, and we're going to keep on working together, changing lives and encouraging a lot of folks out there. They can get out of the rat race. And you don't need $1 billion, and you don't need 1,000 acres. You just need to have you need to act on a blessing. And you need to say, this is my new mission and my new passion and my new ministry. And that's what I did. And ever since then, all the things that I've needed have been placed in my lap. And we just need to execute against what we've been given.
Let's be real. Going broke isn't part of the farming dream. If you want to escape from the corporate grind without ending up in financial freefall, you need a plan. Here's how to make your farm move without wrecking your bank account.
Now, one thing, Grant, on being able to be financially able to be able to get into farming, there are a lot of different strategies. The one that you've got to decide is, I'm going to do it. So if you're willing to do it, now, this is coming from a great-grandson of a slave who was born in 1845, had nothing. He had no podcast shows to listen to. He had no banks that would loan him money. He was a slave. He bankrolled his life by joining the Union Army to get freedom, to be able to talk to anyone, to be able to get the Union Benevolent Society to issue him a loan. So he didn't have what we have today. Today, anybody out there listening right now, the USDA's got mortgages that can take you down to 0%. They want people to get into farming. Secondly, you don't have to buy 1,000 acres. You don't have to buy a $1 million acre farm. You can start off with a farm that costs $30,000, $20,000. You can work part-time or even full-time to cover that nut and to work after work. 86% of farmers have off-farm jobs. So there's no reason why today someone young who wants to get into farming can't get into it. But in my case, my wife, Kathy, did a good job of helping us to invest properly. If you're out there listening and you've got a 401k at your job, you need to invest 100% of what they can. If it's 10% max it. If they give you 20, if they match, put as much as you can in it as early as possible, so that within 15 to 20 years, the average person working, even if you have a job on an assembly line at Toyota over in Georgetown, you could be a millionaire, meaning you can have $1 million to $1.5 million in the bank in investments that then you can start using that to get loans, use it as collateral, as well as what I also did and what you all helped me on is you gave me the intellectual capital in farming, but I reached out to a really great financial advisor that changed the game for me because I didn't really know what I was going to do. I was a mess emotionally. And they've got my money in so many great companies and assets and instruments that it kicks off about $100,000, $150,000 a year that I can use to live on while I'm investing more in the farm and marketing to grow the business even further. And so planning starts immediately. And if you're 20 and you're a plumber, if you're an administrative assistant, if you're a media director for a media company out there, whether if you're making $50,000 or $100,000, you can begin today in saving money towards this dream. You can keep that job and have a small farm and grow it over time. That's America. This is what America, we live in a $30 trillion economy. And America is based on entrepreneurship and based on people taking a risk. And as a result, you get low interest loans and you don't have to pay a lot of taxes. And anything you spend, including marketing, is tax deductible. That's the difference. Farm like your future depends on it, because it does. At Coleman Crest Farm, we're not just farming today, we're building a future where small, sustainable farms thrive instead of being wiped out by big ag. Even if you're not in Kentucky, you can still make a difference. Every time you choose farm direct organic food over industrial agriculture food, you're helping to keep real farmers in business. Want to learn more about why small farms matter and how you too can be a part of our movement? Visit ColemanCrestFarm.com, because the future of farming depends on all of us. Now back to the show.
All right, Jim, let's play Hollywood versus reality. I'm going to throw out some of the biggest farming cliches from movies and TV, and you tell us, is Hollywood getting it right or is it total nonsense? Are you ready? Here's theme 1. Farmers wake up at sunrise every single day.
You know, I would like for my employees to, and my farm manager when you were working for me, but not me. I might as well go back to work. Some days you wake up earlier for whatever's going on. But most days, that's part of freedom and owning your own land and your own business, is you wake up based on what you need to get accomplished for the day.
And I can only imagine that, people who raise animals, they got to be on 24-hour call anytime there's lambs or calves coming out.
It's different, isn't it?
Yeah, you got to be there for your animals. And, with organic farming, our crops grow during the day. Of course, we look out to make sure there aren't too many things eating our crops. But, other than that, there isn't much we can do without the sun. So
it's growing, and we've got an irrigation system that you hit it in the morning. You can do it from your phone or manually, and you give it an hour in the morning of water, an hour in the afternoon. Maybe some weeding, but you don't have to weed at 5 a.m. Bottom line is farming is a cool gig where it's based on freedom. And you can start when you want. Got to be organized because we don't always get, we don't always get 7 days a week to work.
Nope.
How
There's
many days
always
a week,
rain and weather.
How many days would you say on average it's going to rain, Grant?
4.5 or 5 days a week we got, maybe.
So I call those rain days. That's when you don't have to necessarily go out and you can start doing some planning, get caught up on communications with your customers, pay bills, check to make sure you're getting paid. You don't want to do so much. All of a sudden, you got somebody out there that's 90 days and you haven't gotten paid yet. So you get enough administrative days, but balancing that off. But the idea of waking up at 5 a.m. I wake up at 5 a.m. to see what's going on in the market, read what's going on in the news, but I don't wake up at 5 a.m. to start driving my tractor down the road.
Jim, I kind of disagree with the last thing you said about administration days. Yeah, sure, in the spring you get administration days, but when it's harvest season, July through September or October, we're wearing ponchos and we're making sure that we're current with our customers and that they have the product that we promised them. And we're out there picking okra or picking tomatoes, harvesting potatoes, whatever we need to in the rain. And of course, with some of these root vegetables, you can't get to them unless it's dry. Mm-hmm. And that was definitely something that we dealt with.
Now, one thing that I do recall that, once you get your farm going and then you have staff, is there's a lot of preparation before they get there. You don't want to have to put stuff in the truck and here's what we're going to do. And that needs to be ready because they're going to be waiting. And then you're paying them by the hour while you're still getting ready. So I remember when you and the team would come out, I needed to get out, get some Egg McMuffins, get some new juices, have things laid out, clean up the garage where we met, make sure the tools were in the truck so that when you all got there, you had your breakfast, let's get moving. And that made us productive. But that didn't always mean I had to get out at 5 a.m. I don't want anybody to misunderstand. This is not a grueling business. It's a fun business, but you got to work. And you got to be willing to put both the work ethic in it on the physical side, as well as the risk of, managing expenses and managing investments in it.
All right, Jim, here's the next theme. Farming is peaceful, slow-paced, and stress-free.
Now, that is going 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. I mean, a lot of people out there thinking you wake up, like Little House on the Prairie. I remember the Waltons. Hello, Mom. Hello, Bob. This is Jimbo. And relaxing and sleeping in. That's not necessarily how it happens. There's something going on every day on a farm. Something's broken. Something's not working. Something didn't show up. And you're always problem solving. And so that requires you to get up out of the bed, be alert, wake up, and be focused, or you can get behind. What do you think?
I remember a couple of days that I would get to the farm, and like you said, you had all the Egg McMuffins ready and everything, but we had a fountain coming out of our irrigation system in one of the fields. Something had nicked it, either farm equipment or if we were planting by hand, some kind of tool. And then we had to make a quick run to Ryan's Agri and When we grew cabbage that first year in 2021, we had the cabbage loopers everywhere, and there were hundreds of them. It was like 300 that I would see around this patch, and of course we had the protect net on it, but they found a way to fly under it. And so I remember we made a trip to Ranzagri and got the pyrethrin, which is the chamomile extract. So it's just, concentrated from a flower, and that ended up being, a good enough insecticide to kind of just get them to cool off the cabbage. And, when you consume it, it's just as edible as, eating anything else. It comes straight from nature. It's not going to give you cancer. So
I remember one time when we were out there building beds, that the plastic was not sticking to the ground properly, and the soil wasn't covered properly. And we found out by just tweaking it, by putting it under the roller the right way, which just that one mistake was causing us to have to repeat the work and working harder and not getting the full use out of that equipment. And it was taking up a lot of time because we were out there being frustrated, not fully paying attention to how the flow was going, and losing time and productivity.
But so what you're saying is it's not peaceful and slow paced. We're always problem solving. We're always trying to find out what's the most efficient way to do it so that we don't have to do the back-breaking labor.
Absolutely. I remember many times, two sources that we would use. We'd use YouTube and Eric. I remember you say, let's call Dad. What were some of the things that you'd call Dad on that we fixed? Saved us, that was even better than looking on YouTube?
It was only a couple of times in the first year. I don't think we really called him that much the second year, but I think it was more with the bed shaper, making sure it was laying right. And then when it came to using the polyplanter on top of the plastic beds, kind of trying to figure out, how do we align this so that we're not popping the irrigation line and that we're getting the holes in and getting the seeds in. And
now, that first year we were in business, we used his tractor with the attachments before we started using the Kubota that I own. And Eric had this way, it's not like a diagram, but he knew when it was in first, second, third, fourth. He knew it was a weird way of how to even get it started.
Yep.
That only he could do. How did we get around that?
Well, the Kubota was so much simpler. And I remember, us having to adjust the equipment between, the blue tractor and the Kubota. And, each piece of equipment fit on each tractor differently. And we couldn't just set it one way and leave it. We had to keep adjusting and keep changing it. And when we got the Kubota, we just left everything in one place and it stayed great.
You hit on something. If you're looking for peace of mind and trying to make things a little bit more balanced, invest in the right equipment up front. Invest in equipment that's easy to use, that's reliable. That Kubota tractor is like automatic. You put it in gear, you let it off and stop, versus handling all the gears and all that. So the equipment that you buy, make sure it's easy to understand and that's simple. Because if you get into too complicated, you just waste time and lose productivity.
And it has so many safety features. It's like if you stand up, the whole tractor shuts off.
I remember one time when I was out there, and you know how farmers on a big John Deere, they stand up to cool off because so much sweat underneath their butts. And one day I said, I'm hot on this tractor. So I said, I'm going to stand up I remember Stanley Pearsall, one of my friends in my neighborhood. He was cool always when I was growing up. He was stand up driving a John Deere tractor, standing. And I said, when I get a tractor one day, I'm going to stand up just like Stanley. And I did that out in the field one day, and it almost threw me off because it instantly stopped.
I was thinking you probably start going flying if you were having it going fast enough.
I was getting ready to get on the phone to call Kubota to come out. I said, how in the hell did I buy a tractor that I've only had a few months now and stopped? Everybody said Kubota is like the Nissan of tractors. And I got on the YouTube, and I looked, and it's come to find out the reason why I stood up is the sensor on the seat. It demonstrated that shut down the engine because the weight was not on the seat. And that was a safety feature intended for the tractor to stop because the majority of deaths happen because of farmers standing while they're driving.
Wow.
So it's about what you invest in, the right type of equipment, the right people that can give you the lifestyle that you're looking for on a farm.
Here's the third theme. You just plant seeds and nature does the rest.
Well, if you do plant seeds, nature will do the rest. If you plant seeds the right time under the right conditions with the help of nature, you will meet your desired results. And it's a big difference. You can go out there, and again, if I didn't have you all, I would have said, okay, I guess it's July. Let me go out and start planting. Well, now, that's when you're normally supposed to be harvesting. So I'd have gone out there. I guess it's, it's not snowing anymore, so I guess I better get around to seeding. And I would have missed the whole year. So it's about knowing when to get things done at the right time and working with nature and managing nature, quite frankly. Managing your time according to nature's clock, or you're going to miss the whole season.
Here's the next theme. Farmers are uneducated, simple folk.
That is just the opposite. Farmers are some of the most intelligent people that I've ever met. They're problem solvers. Oftentimes, again, 86% of them work a full-time job somewhere. And they're committed, and they're smart, and they're able to get a lot done in a little bit of time with the least amount of money and investment. And if you get into farming and you don't know a lot, it won't take too many seasons to where you get smart. And if you're going to stay in business, they become even smarter because you learn quick on how not to waste time and waste fuel. Like I used to mow my entire field every summer, and I enjoyed it. Only to find out two things. I'm destroying all the pollinator habitat, and I'm driving up my cost on fuel. Who cares? I mean, it looks even more pretty for the farm to not be mowed. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I'd say one description for a lot of farmers could definitely be abrasive. We're not going to stick to the rules. We're not going to, stick to pleasantries. And one example of that is, my dad's farmer friend, Vincent, he was, kind of a hermit. And, my father introduced him to all of these great customers. And one of them was a hotel. And he went there and cursed out the chef. And Vincent knew, that he wasn't going to keep having his business after that. Yeah. He was, educated. He has a degree, but he's just not principled like that.
Stubborn and not principled.
Yeah.
And skilled.
Yeah.
When I went to Howard University, all the kids there called me Bama. And I'm still a Bama. Uneducated. He doesn't know anything. He looks country. Look, I'm still a Bama today. And a lot of people who conform, who kiss up, they're not used to the independent nature of the farmer types. Your dad, Dr. Will Hoyt, my father, you, myself, we're independent thinkers. And we don't like a lot of people telling us what to do. And when you own a piece of land, you get it for freedom and you know it all. So we do come off sometimes as hard-headed, kind of country and kind of backwards. But it really is just the opposite because we're good business people and we're surviving every day and we know what it's like to meet the payment each month on some piece of equipment or to meet payroll. Escaping the corporate grind and building something real takes more than just a dream. It takes a plan. If today's episode sparked something in you, let's take the conversation beyond the podcast. I like to speak at schools, businesses, and organizations about career transitions, leadership, farming, and building a life of independence. Whether if you're a company looking to inspire your team or a group exploring new paths to freedom, let's connect. Let's set up a speaking engagement. Connect with me on LinkedIn and let's make it happen. Now back to the show. Some people dream about escaping the grind. Others actually do it. Meet two people who traded boardrooms for barns, turned soil into dollars, and built a life on their own terms. Think you could do the same?
So Jim, tell me a little bit more about Susan and George Miller, who are escaping the grind of corporate life. Susan's a teacher and George works in manufacturing. Tell me a little bit more about how they're transitioning away from those traditional jobs into full-time farming.
George and Susan are the ideal example of weaning yourself out of a job. The idea of saying, I'm going to quit today and I'm going to start doing farm. That's not necessary. For some people, as a matter of fact, that's too radical and too risky. You keep your full-time job and use the money from that to invest in your new venture and wean yourself out of it over time. And so Susan and George, they're two of the top farmers in Kentucky, especially small farmers. I know at Kentucky State, they got Small Farmer of the Year award. And the reason why is that Susan sells a lot of produce. She's a top producer of tomatoes. She's got a hoop house. They grow all year long. They pump out a ton of volume. But Susan is also a full-time counselor at a high school. How they find the time is that they're just good managers. They manage to the detail. They do have two wonderful daughters that help them a lot, but they work the fields pretty good. But Grant, you and I know it's just their passion, and they love it. And Susan is counting. She knows down to the days and hours of when she's going to be able to fully retire so that she can dedicate 100% of her time to farming. I respect them because they haven't had to go out and take a big mortgage. They've used their earnings from their jobs to help finance what they need for their farm. And they put together a plan of freedom, a freedom plan. And they're going to have that, and they're going to enjoy their lives. They only have 5 acres, but they pump out more volume than some farms that have 50 acres.
And they're debt free, which I think is really important to touch on. And, they have a farm stand. I believe they take some produce into town, but I think that's kind of their main market is just to their neighbors. And
it's not like they're 5 or 8 miles from downtown Lexington. I'm glad they're not in Lexington. They'd put me out of business.
And it's not like they're selling, the luxury organic product that we are. They're a little bit more in the country, and so their neighbors don't expect to have organic produce and clean,
they
healthy
use the conventional
vegetables.
Practices.
So they are conventional, but I think there's a lot to learn from them just because they get such great yields. Susan's beautiful canning tomatoes. She just has bushels and bushels and bushels of them. And, she just has this farm stand, and that's how she ships all of her business. But you really have to have a community built around you to be able to make it in a system like that.
One thing that I see them also doing, Grant, is they go to every conference. They're always learning. So every conference, whether it's the fruit and vegetable conference at the beginning of the year, they come to Oaks Conference, Organic Association of Kentucky. They go to events, they visit other farms. I don't know how they do it, but they manage their time. But they always are learning about new ways. Second thing is that they're good at finding resources. There are tons of grants grants on money, not grants on farmer grant, but grants on money that they get from the USDA. And because Susan's got a good research ability by being a counselor, she uses that same skill to research new grants. And they get these grants to help offset their costs for hoop houses and equipment and all that. And then the third thing is that they work very closely, like with Kentucky State University, where instead of going out there and buying, a bed maker or another piece of equipment, they borrow the equipment from Kentucky State and other resources so they don't have to go out there and buy the new equipment. So anybody that's listening to our show today, you don't have to, if you can get your land, that's a good start. Keep your job, pay for it. Maybe you can build a house on the farm. Now all of a sudden you got a good write-off. Then on top of that, you can use grants like the Millers, tons of grants to offset your cost, as well as you can borrow equipment to help you to get through. And if you've got kids, put them to work. You started working at what age, Grant?
4 years old.
Okay, so any moms and dads out there that got kids, it ain't unfair to make them start working. I started working when I was about 4 or 5. I became the manager of Coleman Crest when I was 12. You and I both grew up on the farm, and it was good for us. So, I mean, that can be the pathway. And I think you're right on. Susan and George, they deserve our respect.
And one of the most important grants in Kentucky is the CAPE grant. And that's one of the best resources for farmers. And, with this equipment, you have to book it pretty far ahead of time to be able to make sure that you're getting it. You have a time period between when the ground thaws, middle of March, until May when you want to start planting, and you gotta book it several months ahead of time.
Fill out the applications for it.
Absolutely, and there are resources out there.
So if you book it like I do, and you know what, filling out the paperwork can be kind of difficult, but guess what? If you have the patience and the tenacity to fill out the paperwork, you've already gotten yourself about a 98% chance of getting the award. Because why? Most farmers are going to say, that much paperwork, forget it, I'll take a pass on it. And you know what, Grant? They may even be more qualified if they filled out the application to get the grant than you getting it. But because farmers aren't always paying attention to getting these really simple $4,000, $8,000 grants, $10,000 grants, you don't have a lot of competition because they're not fighting for it by going through the process. So if you fill out the paperwork, you stand a good chance of being able to get the money, and it will help to offset your cost on your farm. Fast forward 5 years. Are you stuck in that cubicle, or are you walking through fields that you own? That vision starts with the very first step. I'll show you exactly how to start turning that dream into reality right now. And Grant, on top of what I've already talked about, in the area of financing and where do you get the money and all, there are a lot of things that you can do way beyond even going to purchase. And one thing that especially aspiring farmers who are really committed to wanting to own a farm one day, because it doesn't have to happen overnight. How about work at a farm part-time? Any farmer would be delighted if you call them up and say, you mind if I help you this summer? Here are the hours I've got. And go and try the work. See if you can learn from that farmer. Ask questions. Learn how to drive a tractor. Learn how to get something attached to the PTO. Learn how to understand the planning process. You can do that and learn a lot to where now you become more sophisticated on understand the business of farming. So that as you go out there, you don't get tricked. You don't go out there and buy 5 acres that's not 100% of it's non-tillable. You want to buy 5 acres that's flat with the right soil where you can use the equipment and the irrigation is going to be smooth. But you can get burned if you go too fast. What do you think?
Yeah, don't buy it next to a river, I'll tell you that, because things flood more than you think. Yeah. But to kind of the points that you were saying, I'd say, hey, absolutely become a tenant farmer, become a part-time worker. And, the best time of year to learn about farming is when you're preparing the beds for the year. And of course, the most fulfilling time is harvest, when you're harvesting all the great crops. But there's a lot that happens in between those two times. There's the planning beforehand, there's ordering the seeds, there's putting together your plan, cold calling customers. And then once you're getting the season started, after you've planted, you've got to weed every couple months. Then you got to ship to your customers. And so there's a lot of steps involved, but I'd say kind of what beginning farmers need the most is how do you prepare the field for the first year.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are some other good resources that most states have. I know in Kentucky we've got this, and we're just launching it at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Krista Jacobson just secured a $750,000 grant from the USDA to launch an aspiring farmer program at the University of Kentucky. And they're very selective on who they bring into the program because they want to make sure you're really committed. This is not just, I want to just learn. I don't know if I want to get into this or not, but I just want to learn. They're looking for people that are serious about wanting to one day be farmers. And it's a 9-month program. You go once a week, but it's very hands-on, practical to planning, to planting your crops, to harvest, to selecting the right crops. And I think most universities, University of Kentucky is very unique and it's powerful, but those who are listening outside of Kentucky, most states have a land grant university. Go to that land grant university or community college and see if they've got an aspiring farmer program. I know at the University of Kentucky, it's 100% free. And what better way to learn about farming from an accredited university so that two things, when you get into farming, whether it's in your backyard, that's another thing I wanted to say is, you don't need even 5 acres. If you have a little home and you're renting a house and you've got a little half a quarter acre backyard, start growing 5 or 6 rows of something in your backyard. Try it out to see. The best thing that could happen to anyone is to say at the end of the season, you know what, I want to be a farmer, but this is hard. I think I'm going to be a day trader. I don't want to do this. You know what? You've saved yourself because it's not for everybody. But if you do discover that this is something that you want, the resources that are out there by the USDA, by most of these land grant universities, it's usually overwhelming. And take advantage of these resources and learn so that when you do go to get a loan from a bank like USDA or Farm Credit or Field and Main Bank or any of the great banks in your market, you sound like a business person, which reduces the risk and gets you a better interest rate. And it gives you a better chance of getting the loan that you need to buy the piece of land that you're trying to buy because you sound like you know what you're talking about. You have credibility. You can stay stuck in that office waiting for the right time, or you can start building your farm dream today. The choice is yours. It's time to grow the farm, build the wealth, change the game.